Let's go over how to solve an example of a branching problem. In this problem, it says, write a program that randomly generates an integer between 1 and 12 and displays the English month name January, February through December for the numbers 1 through 12 accordingly. All right, let's go over how you would program something to solve this problem. Let's go to Eclipse, and we'll need to make a new class. So right-click on your project folder and go ahead and hit Class. Remember to name your classes with a capital letter. So I will call this the month problem. You can check mark so that it'll write public static void main string args for you. Go ahead and click Finish, and it'll go ahead and set up your file. Remember that your package might be named different than mine, and if you name your class something else, that's all right. Just remember to name it with a capital letter. That is a Java standard. Go ahead and write your name as comments at the top. Make sure to put today's date. And then you can write the programming problem number if you want. Remember to always at least put your name at the top as comments. You can also get rid of these to-do comments. Let's go over how to generate a random number. In this programming problem, it says to generate a random number for our month. There are a couple different ways that you can generate a random number. We're going to need to store that number inside of an integer, which I'll call random number. One of the easiest ways to generate a random number is to use the math.random class. And when you type this into Eclipse, a pop-up box will tell you about that method. And it says it is a method that returns a double between the numbers 0 and 1, meaning that we can think of this line of code right here as a number between the numbers 0 and 1. So if we have a really small number, how would we get this number, a really small number, to be a number between 1 and 12? What we need to do is move this decimal place over one place. And then I could use this integer part as my random number. To move a decimal place over one step or one digit, you multiply that really small number by 10. We then want to take this number that has a fractional part, and we only want to keep the integer part here in the front. So we're going to typecast this number that has a fractional part as an integer. And there we go. Now we're going to get a number between 0 and 9. But we want to get a number between 0 and 12. What if we multiplied this times 12? Now we're going to get a number between 0 and 12. And to demonstrate that this works, you can always output or run your debugger. Remember, SYSO control space is the shortcut for your system out print line. And you can go ahead and double click Control C and click Control V and print out that random number. Go ahead and run your code a couple times so that you can see you get a number between 0 and 11. Now what we'd like to have is a number between 1 and 12. So if we're getting numbers between 0 and 11, and we add 1 to these numbers, now we're going to get numbers between 1 and 12. Go ahead and run your code again and make sure that that is true. Another way to get a random number inside of a computer and inside of Java is to use this system method called current time in millis. We can look at this method inside of Eclipse, and we can see that the current time in millis returns the current time inside of our computer in milliseconds. This is going to be a very large number. And why would they use that time, that system clock, to get a random number. Remember that nothing in your computer is random, and the only thing that's constantly changing is the system clock. So even math.random uses the system clock to generate that random number between 0 and 1. This system method called current time in millis is a method that just reads that clock time and returns a really large number. Now to get that really large number to a digit between 0 and 10, or 0 and 9 rather, you could modulus it by the number 10. And this is going to generate a random number between 0 and 9. Now it does have a fractional part, and so we do typecast that really large number again to an integer to get rid of that fractional part. Remember that when you modulus something, you're returning the remainder as a whole number. So the remainder of anything that you divide by 10 is of course going to be a number between 0 and 9. So if I wanted to get a number between 0 and 11, I can modulus it by 11. Now for the same reasoning up here, when we added 1, since I'm getting a number now between 0 and 11, and I'd like to get a number between 1 and 12, I could add 1 to those numbers, whatever number it returns, and now I'm going to get a random number between 1 and 12. You can go ahead and test this. Remember to triple click to select a line in Eclipse, Control C, and then Control V as in Victor to paste. Double click to select a word, Control C, and double click to Control V. So you're copying and pasting. That way you never spell things wrong, and you can code much faster this way. You can go ahead and run that a couple times to make sure it is giving you a number between 0 and 11. Now for this programming problem, we only have to use one method or one way to get a number between 0, or rather 1 through 12 problem. So we need to look at that number that we just generated and print out the corresponding month. And a switch statement would work great since we are dealing with an integer. So we'll go ahead and put that integer into our switch and then make our cases. So if our random number is the number 1, what do we want to do? We want to output the word January. Remember that you also will need a break statement to break out of that case so that we don't fall through to case 2. Now since we're only outputting one simple line of code, you could write your code like this, all on one line, or a more standard approach would be to create new lines for each statement in our code. So we'll do the rest of our cases. I think it makes logical sense how our cases are going to be set up, so I'll go ahead and let you finish this switch statement with all of our cases. Remember that you do not have to have a default case, but you could if you want. All right, we got our switch statement. Our switch statement executes, and depending on what random number is generated is which month will print out. And you can go ahead and run this code and make sure everything works. Just remember to close your switch statement. You can always name your curly brackets so you don't get them mixed up. It's always good programming practice. And test that this works. Now I want to rewrite the switch statement using an if, else branch. Remember that any switch statement can be converted to an if statement. So if I were to write this same programming problem using ifs, I would want to put a Boolean statement inside of my if. And I'd like to check to see which number my random number has generated. So if my random number equals a 1, then I'll go ahead and execute this line of code, which is printing out the month of January. Now I want to use an else if here so that it will only execute one branch, and I can be efficient in writing my code this way. And if my random number is a 2, I'll go ahead and print out February. Now note that I'm only executing one line of code after my if, so these curly brackets are optional. Either way would be correct. Just make sure that you are consistent in your curly brackets. I'll go ahead and leave it to you guys to fill in the rest of these else ifs. Remember that you don't need a space in between them. Alright, and here is our finished product. Make sure you run your code and test it to see that it works. Remember, there are always more than one way to solve a programming problem.